Welcome into episode 64 of the Level Flight podcast. We've got a full crew back here today, Brian and Elliott. The Winnipeg Jets are on their All-Star break. We're not going to talk about what happened going into the All-Star break. They dropped their last 3 games, 2 of them to the Maple Leafs, but whatever. We're here to talk trade targets today. Off screen, we did a little bit of a draft lottery. You guys reached out to us on Twitter, gave us some names that you wanted us to talk about. We took all those names. We're going to draft them in order of who we'd like to see on the Winnipeg Jets. But before we do that, Brian, Elliott, how are we doing?
Well, I'm good. I'm doing better than what the Jets were when they went on to the break, but we're good over here.
We're doing good. I'm excited for this episode. Should be a good one. I have a feeling there's going to be a little bit of controversy.
Elliott, you're on the
quickly.
clock, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so Elliott won the draft lottery. He's going to draft first. I'm going to draft second, and then Brian's going to draft third, and we're going to snake it. So then Brian will draft again and draft fourth. The draft thing is like kind of in air quotes, like we're just finding a creative way to talk about all of the names that you guys gave to us. Thank you to everyone who reached out on our Twitter. Let's get into it with the first pick. Elliott, you're on the clock. There's a bunch of names in a separate document we have off screen, but it's basically every name that was thrown in our tweet on Twitter at LevelFlightWPT. But Elliott, you're up.
So I'm going to go with the player that it's not an immediate need for the Jets. It's not the 2C. So I think you know where I'm going. I've been saying they've needed another top 4D for the longest time. I know he was just moved last year. This is going to be controversial, but I'm going to take Jacob Chychrun.
Wow.
Just because the age, he still has 2 years left on his deal. That's like the perfect amount of years for Kevin Cheveldayoff. Can't have anybody with 1 year left or with 3 years. Has to be 2 years left. Got to make sure that we get a year and a half exactly with the player. But I personally think that as much as this decor has been great, we just saw what happened to Declan Chisholm, which means that they're one injury away from having Logan Stanley come back into the lineup. And I'd much prefer them to have Nate Schmidt sitting as the 7th defenseman. Or it could be somebody else, could be Brendan Dillon. But I just think Chychrun would absolutely just make that decor as solid as possible. Obviously, I'm going to go with a forward for my next pick because I think they still need a 2C. But you also look at the options, and the 2C market, there isn't a clear winner, right? You look at the decor and D options at least, and you go, oh, well, Chychrun's here. He's supposed to be a difference maker. I'm sure with a good roster around him, he can be. So that is why I picked Jacob Chychrun.
Okay. There you go. If you're on YouTube, Brian's got the draft results, the ticker up there on the bottom.
We're going all in.
Before we get into the second pick and the argument for Elliott's first pick, I thought it'd be a good idea. We should just read every name on the list for podcast listeners, just for context reasons, so they know who we're choosing from. So we've got Sean Monahan, Boone Jenner, Adam Henrique, Elias Lindholm, Casey Middlestat, Brock Nelson, Ryan O'Reilly, Matthew Joseph, Thomas Hertel, Braden Shen, Pavel Buchnevich, Claude Giroux, Vladimir Tarasenko, Dominic Kubalik, and then on defense, Chris Tanev, Sean Walker, Jacob Chychrun. Elliott went Chychrun with number 1. As the person holding the second pick, I agree. But with you holding the first pick, I disagree. Not like you did preface it by saying they do need a 2C. I just don't, for a few reasons. I don't think Chychrun's the guy. If they were to get a defenseman, I'd prefer Tanev, in my opinion. And I'd prefer a 2C basically in general anyways. That's my disagreement with your pick. But the reasons you said, good puck mover, could play with Josh Morrissey, or a Brendan Dillon, good puck mover, power play guy, makes sense to me. Term, reasonable cap hit. Brian, what are your thoughts?
I've been a big fan of Chychrun for a while. I was really disappointed when I saw what Ottawa ended up paying for him last year because I thought the Jets could have done so. I am of the mindset that, well, yes, a top 4 defenseman would be nice. I don't think it's the most pressing need. And as you said, Connor, I don't know if he's the guy to be the one to slot in there. You said Tanev. I'm a big Sean Walker guy with what he would offer. But I don't think it's necessarily inherently wrong to go with Chikrin because of the impact he has. And he would immediately step into a top 4 role and probably do very well here.
Yes, that is for sure. And not only for this year, but next year. That's a big kind of caveat to this whole thing, is the fact that he would be here. And a lot of the Jets are coming back next year. I think that's another thing. Like, rentals make sense. Guys with 2 years left in their deal also make sense. Yeah, I guess I'm on the clock now. Let me
You
take
are
a
on
look
the
at these
clock.
names. So many names to choose from. Oh my goodness. There is a name that I think Brian is going to take because he was one of the first people to bring him up on this pod. But I want to take him, but I did just say like 30 seconds ago that the 2C was the biggest need. So I'm going to stick with that. Someone threw out the name of Brock Nelson. That to me would be an absolute home run. He's got 2 years left on his deal, just like Chikrin. And he is just an absolute beast. Chris Johnston of The Athletic released his best on best national team like predictions, and Brock Nelson wasn't even like a snub or like an afterthought for Team USA, and people lit him up in the comments. Where's Brock Nelson? Where's Brock Nelson? So if you like want to know how good this guy is, a lot of people were asking for him to be on Team USA or like a depth piece on Team USA, and we know how stacked that forward core is. He's a two-way center, fills the net, $6 million cap hit, very manageable. He'd be an absolute beast of a 2C, and he would just fit the mold. Now, if we were ranking them by realistic or how realistic it is that they're actually on the trade block, Brock Nelson would probably be near the bottom. But it's a name that was thrown out there. It's a name with 2 years left of term, and the Islanders probably not going to make the playoffs. I don't hate it. And Brock Nelson is an absolute stud. So that's going to be my first pick. I don't know if you guys disagree, have any thoughts.
I love Brock Nelson as a thought. And I honestly, I don't think it's like totally realistic, but it wouldn't shock me if it was a name that, gets moved just with, he's been there for a long time. And at some point or another, you got to think that he'll be moving on, whether if that's in 2 years when his deal expires or next year when he's got that 1 year left. But I think that this is a year that the Islanders had higher expectations. They just made a coaching change. And so you got to be real that if they're not bouncing back after Patrick Waugh comes in at all, there's thought of some of the bigger names might be on the market. I don't think you'll see a Barzal move. That's been thrown out there more than I think it should be. But I do also think that Brock Nelson, though, given the fact that he's 31, I think he might be one of those guys that could be the one that, fetches something at the deadline for them without moving one of their stars, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and real quick before we get Elliott's thoughts, I quickly flipped over to the J Fresh thing. If you're here on YouTube, 91% projected WAR percentage. The EV defense, I think, would come up, especially in the Jets system. But you look at the thing that sticks out to me, 96% finishing, 96% goals. The Jets have kind of struggled with goal scoring, especially when Mark Scheifele went out of the lineup. I think they scored like 9 goals in their last 6 games, something along those lines. So big fan of Brock Nelson, and his J Fresh card checks out. Elliott.
I think he's a good player. I like both of you said, is he available? Is the question. That's what the biggest thing is, I think. But I think if he's available, then the Jets, realistically, when I look at this list of players, we know that their opportunity to pick up a big name was probably last year. I would probably say that the names on our current list are a little bit weaker, just as an overall. But if you add Brock Nelson to that list of guys that the Jets are going to go chase, I think that elevates the ceiling of a potential, like, okay, this is a difference maker that's going to, and I think that's what the Jets need. The Jets need a player that's like, this isn't last year where, like, obviously they may throw a 4th or a 5th at somebody for right? Like a shoe in later depth piece. You always do if you're contending. But I think the Jets need to make sure that if they're picking somebody up, you're not going to pay big for someone who's not going to make a difference. I think Brock Nelson would be a player that I would be okay with calling up the Islanders and them going, okay, we're willing to give up Nelson. And Chevy goes, okay, well, who? Right? Like,
Yeah,
and throwing almost anybody at them to try to get him. I would be more than okay if that meant, let's say, a Brad Lambert or, you know, whoever else is there, whoever they want, honestly. If it means Brock Nelson, then I think then you throw the kitchen sink, essentially, as long as you're not getting completely fleeced. But yeah, I think it's a good pick.
Okay. Appreciate that. Quickly on the you said the market, and I agree with you. The market is worse, or like perceived worse this year than last year. I think a big reason for that, though, I've actually been thinking about why that is. Last year, there's Timo Meier, and you knew he was on the market because he was a pending RFA. The Sharks were god awful, and it was like, that's the number one guy. Now the number one guy is like Elias Lindholm, who I'm sure we're going to talk about, but he's like, again, a pending UFA, having one of his worst years of his career. It's like, okay, like, is that like, he's not really going to fetch the big return that Timo Meier would. So the market as a whole just feels worse at the top, if that makes sense. But I agree with you that the market does feel worse. But when teams start to fall out closer to the trade deadline, like an Islanders, and like some of these other teams that we'll bring up here, I'm sure, I think the market could improve, and that's when the Jets could pounce. So we'll see. Brian, you're up twice, back-to-back picks. You are on the clock.
All right. So we are wading into the territory of two caveats here with this pick. One, there really hasn't been much official speculation whether this guy is available. There's talk based on another sort of, it's one of those teams that every year are supposed to take that next step and they're still struggling. It's a little bit, there's some despair, some apathy in the fan base. A player that had a little bit of a slow start to his career and has started to establish himself as a genuine second line center. And of course, I am going to the great city of Buffalo, New York, and selecting Casey Middlestat with the 3rd overall pick. I have been a doubter early in his career because I feel like he was kind of thrown into it fairly quickly, and there was a lot of people who were, a little bit doubtful of what he was capable of doing at the NHL level. And flash forward to this year, we're now looking at someone who is, producing at a decent clip. But it's someone who's also just doing the right things in his game that I do think that he is younger still. So you also have another year of contract, and then he's an RFA. So you hold his rights even longer for that. So obviously that's going to probably cost a little bit, but you have to start wondering at what point does the clock run out in Buffalo where they start moving out some of their younger guys if they're not 100% sure about, right? So you're getting a guy who is fairly decent on the offensive side of the puck. He's a great passer, which is something that if you are putting a second line together, having someone who can feed it down the middle is really good. And also he's not too shabby. He can finish at a decent clip. He's got 12 goals this year. But yeah, his point totals you're going to probably find more on the assist side, but I've been a big fan of what he has done this season, especially. I'd love to know what you guys think about it though.
I love the pick. I love the player. I love the fact that there's term. I love the fact that it's a manageable cap hit. I like that. What goes without saying. I love all of that. All the reasons you said. There's one thing, and it's not a knock on Middlestat whatsoever. It's the fact that he's 24. I don't know if that's updated. 24, 25 years old. And the fact that if you put him in between Perfetti and Ehlers, I don't know if this whole ice time thing gets solved. With a 31-year-old like Brock Nelson, I'm convinced that Rick Bowness would trust that line more. With a younger, kind of soft skill, player like Middlestat, do they still kind of roll the Lowry line as the second line? And then you just have, I mean, I guess the plus side of that is you just have a dynamic third line of Perfetti, Middlestat, and Ehlers, which would be unbelievable. But I just don't. A thing I've been thinking about with the 2C acquisition is will Rick Bowness trust them? And Casey Middlestat, I'm not sure if he would.
You're gonna love my fourth pick then.
Okay. Elliott, what are your thoughts on Middlestat?
I think it's a good pick, but also here's my other point. You need, like, he is a two-way player, but if he's more of a passer, you kind of already have a passer on your line with Perfetti if you're putting him on the second line, right? If you let's say the lines are, when everybody's healthy, is Connor, Scheifele, Velarde, because we know that the Jets want to go back to that. So that means it's Perfetti and Ehlers on the wings, right? You have a shooter and chance creator in Ehlers, and you have a essentially pure passer in Perfetti. You need someone who's going to do both, like, kind of is going to be a two-way defensive player to kind of anchor Ehlers a little bit. Obviously, Perfetti, we know, is decent enough defensively, but you then need someone else who's going to be able to score a little bit. I think Middlestat is a little bit too much of a passer for me, to where I feel like you get those possessions. Like, I don't know, I hate bringing up a basketball reference, but you know when you watch a possession and there's too many passes and they've like given up like 4 open looks at a 3 because everybody's passing out there because they don't want to shoot it? That's kind of what I feel like it would maybe be with Middlestat. And I agree with you on the whole, is Bonus gonna like play that line? Like, if you do a Brock Nelson, or there are a couple other names on this list of players that we know that would go down the middle and he'd play them more, which means Perfetti and Ehlers' ice times go up. So that's where I'm a little hesitant about it. But other than that, I think if we didn't have to worry about that issue, and I mean, I think if you already didn't have like a pure passer on the line, I think that would be like the perfect acquisition.
Well, I think the solution, like if they were to get Middlestat, the like just kind of it's hitting you in the face solution is move Ehlers up with Scheifele and Velarde, and then have Perfetti, Middlestat, and Kyle Connor, and just have Perfetti and Middlestat just feeding Kyle Connor and have him take 12 shots a game.
Oh my God.
But
Kyle Connor on the second line? Oh no. How could we ever do that to make everything balanced? Oh.
Yeah. Anyways, yes. Brian is Brian is back up on the clock with the 4th pick in the Snake Trade Targets draft.
See, what you're going to understand here is that I just wanted Middlestat on my team. So now I can take a pick that I would trust more to be played. And that will be, some people think I might go with the obvious pick that's been thrown around. I'm not. I'm going with Adam Henrique.
Adam Henrique. Okay.
Good pick.
Okay. Elliott, what are your thoughts? Or Brian? Yeah.
I just want to say he is one of those guys that it feels like he's constantly sort of like floating around in the market. But he's got a year less on his deal now, because I feel like last year there was talk that he might get moved. But what you're seeing now is a guy who is, winding down in Anaheim, but he's still a really solid guy, a guy who, plays a good game, someone who I think Rick Bowness would trust. He's, a veteran, and, you're getting also a player who has, proven for quite a long time that he has been a solid second line center guy. He's one of those players that we're really finding out about the whole, like, how much different the sort of pick pool is this year in terms of trade, when I'd be content with an Adam Henrique, but it feels like a realistic and also a very much a bonus choice that would actually bring that that second line into a point where they'd actually trust to play it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he's a veteran. He's 33 years old. I think he's got 15 goals in the season, which would be 3rd on the Jets behind Connor and Ehlers. And obviously Scheifele has missed the last 6 games. He'd probably be ahead of Henrique if that were the case. But yeah, I don't hate it whatsoever. He's a veteran. He's done it before. He hasn't played in the playoffs actually in a long time. Since his New Jersey Devil days, which were really early in his career. But yeah, I love the thought. I don't
Look at those power
see
play
why not.
numbers.
The power play would fix the power play. 1 year left, pure rental. Cap hits high, but you could definitely do some salary retention on that. Elliott, I don't. I'm failing to see kind of the downside of Adam Henrique, which might be like a secondary option. Like you won't have to pay a 1 for Adam Henrique. I don't know.
No, I have been a huge Adam Henrique fan ever since his days with the New Jersey Devils. Um, I I love his game, and I kind of see him more as a 3C in my opinion. But I think on the Jets, I think he'd be a perfect 2C because like Adam Lowry, you can't move up the lineup. Like he has to be 3 or 4C, right? So having Adam Henrique as a 2C, I think is perfect. And I think he adds to that offensive punch to align potentially with Perfetti and Ehlers. I think he would be fantastic. The only thing, again, obviously we know that, as you can see, his EV defense isn't great, but he's also playing the Anaheim Ducks. Like that will come
And
up. But
you have to
he's
think of the
never,
system too.
yeah, you have to think of the
Mhm.
system. I also don't know if historically he's been a great defender, but that line already has Perfetti as a good enough defender, and Ehlers has shown that he is
He's been
adequate
break
enough.
even in his career. Like he's one of those guys that like he's been good enough defensively. There's no glaring real issues. Like he's not one of those guys that it's like you look at him and he's like, this guy does not. He's scared of defending.
Yeah.
He's one of those guys that I think that he can hold his own. Like he's not going to be one of those players that you look to as like, oh, he is the epitome of a two-way center. And he's not giving you the defensive impact as say like a Vlad Nemesnikov, but you're making up for it in the offense that he would probably create.
Yeah. I think it's a fantastic pick. I was going to be picking him because I've been a huge fan of his for a long time. So, but no, that's a fantastic pick, Brian.
All right. Brian has got Adam Henrique and Casey Middlestat. Elliott's got Jacob Chikrin, and I've got who did I take? Brock Nelson. Sorry. And again, while I'm making my second pick here, and again, realistically, if we were ranking these guys based on how likely it is, this guy would be near the bottom. I believe this team is now in a playoff spot. They've actually been playing really well as of late. They just lost to the Columbus Blue Jackets last night, as I say that, 1-0 in a shootout. But the St. Louis Blues, and when I say that team name, you likely know who I'm going with. Probably the best J Fresh card we'll see out of all the names brought up. But Pavel Buchnevich was a name that people are throwing out there. $5.8 million cap hit. And yeah, if you're on YouTube, I mean, just take a look at this J Fresh card. He's an absolute beast everywhere on the ice. First line player. It does say position left wing, right wing, center, but he hasn't played center in his career like at all.
He's played like a
I
total of
think,
like 20 games at center.
yeah, like that's not really what he's here for. But yeah, just the Jets are elite at 5-on-5, so this is kind of making a strength a strength. Getting Pavel Buchnevich, who's a winger, you have an abundance of wingers. If this was the big swing, you kind of have to really make a concentrated effort to make Nemestikov or Perfetti. And Nemestikov's worked at 2C, but I'm saying like you'd have to make an effort that Velarde would move into the middle or something like that, or even Buchnevich. If your pro scouts deem that he could play center, go for it, right? But he's just an absolute beast that I can't pass on him here at the fifth pick. Just the 5-on-5 game with him would be even better than it already is. Now it's in division. They're currently in the second wild card spot. But maybe there's a little bit of Nino Niederreiter here, right? Like the Predators were in a playoff spot last year. He had 2 years left on his contract. That was a division rival, and they still helped out the Jets. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibilities, but Pavel Buchnevich, I would say is probably just the best name flat out on the list that was given us. So I'm going to take him here for sure. What are your guys' thoughts, Brian?
I mean, I love the guy. Like I've been a big fan of him since his New York days, and I always felt that he was underutilized there. My friend, also Connor, who is a massive Rangers fan, can attest that for years he, witnessed him sort of bounce around the lineup, but knew that he was sort of more than that. And then obviously he was traded to the Blues. And we're seeing the fact that he is a genuinely great player. And I mean, I think truly I would love him on the team, but I do also wonder the question of, even though he is a genuinely great player and we can see that, if you're bringing a guy in who plays primarily wing, does Rick Bowness trust him to play center at a second line time on ice?
No, and who gets bumped down? Probably
Precisely.
Perfetti. Probably
So
Perfetti.
that's why I haven't. Yeah, I agree that he is the best player on this list. But I'm going fit over talent in some spots because I just don't know if a winger at this point in time, even if he does play center, it won't be at the same level of bringing in as someone who has played center all season. And I would worry about the time on ice. And then you're running, obviously, as you said, you're running a third line of Ehlers, Buchnevich, Perfetti, which unreal, but they need to be playing more than 13 minutes a night.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Elliott?
I think it's a great pick. It's just, yeah, I don't think he plays center for the Jets. And then who do you have to move the lineup around quite drastically. You know what I mean? So then the question then becomes, okay, well then what do you do with the lineup, right? So I think that's where someone who is a dedicated center or has played a lot of center in their career, I think is big, just because then you know that boom, they slide right in for Nemestikov. Nemestikov bumps down. Like we've seen the Jets lineup where Nemestikov isn't 2C, right? So I think it's a great pick. I just don't know how realistic it is also with it being in division.
Sure. Elliott, you're back up on the clock. So
I am. So
take it away.
I'm going to pick a name that recently has been added to discussions. He does have a modified no trade clause that is in the 8-team list. So I actually haven't looked in to see if this player has the Jets on their list or not, which is a little bit of a caveat. They do have 2 years left on their deal after this year at a very reasonable 3.750. That's easily manageable. And I don't think the Jets would have to give up a 1, maybe, but I think it's very unlikely. I'm going to pick Boone Jenner. I think that he is. I think he is a good enough defense. Like he's good defensively. He's a very good two-way player. And I think I'm going to stick with the theme of if the Jets are going 2C, they need to go with somebody who is two-way, dependable. Like essentially, I don't want to say this to batter Vlad Nemestikov, but a step above Vlad Nemestikov. You know what I mean? Where he's good in the offensive zone. You can trust him in his own end. And he's just going to play a good full 200-foot two-way game. And he's going to produce points at a good enough rate.
Yeah. I agree with the pick. I mean, Boone Jenner, I don't know. I think you would have to pay a 1. I'm not going to lie. Like I think given the term, given the cap hit, given that he's the captain of the Columbus Blue Jackets,
I mean, league perception too.
Yeah, I think you would have to pay up. I'm having issues getting his JFresh card up here, but all the things you said kind of check out in terms of he's a two-way player. His power play percentage is actually 86%. He's a goal scorer. His defense, not like 56%. But again, like we've said with every single player, their defensive rating is going to go up on the Winnipeg Jets, like in their system, right? In Rick Bowness's system. So I like the pick. I like the fit at 2C. I like the fact that it's a player that Rick Bowness will absolutely trust to take faceoffs, to take defensive zone shifts, and the fact that the cap hit the term. I like a lot of it. So I agree with your pick, Brian. Your thoughts?
Well, I think too that something that's what's really important, and we spend a lot of time talking about how people overrate faceoffs. I think one, in the eyes of Rick Bowness, it is incredibly important, as at least as a component. But what we also consider here is it does legitimately help provide trust in a line to give them offensive zone starts, which they don't give the second line right now. Because if I recall correctly, Nemesnikov's faceoff percentage is somewhere in the mid 30s. So if you look for guys that have sort of that, impact and then can also win a few more faceoffs than that, then suddenly you see them starting in the offensive zone. And then you have Ehlers getting those starts and allowing him to sort of carry the puck around the zone, which is automatically a huge benefit of this. But yeah, I think that he's one of those guys. And as we know, we don't know if, a longtime Blue Jacket, captain of the Blue Jacket, would waive to go to Winnipeg. We also don't know what the Jackets are planning in terms of what he's worth, if he's even available. Because I feel like that's a loyalty thing there with them. And they've kind of made it clear that he is their guy. But I legitimately wonder if this is something they could swing, because I feel like in terms of fit, I wouldn't hate it. Like, he's not going to, be an insanely great offensive player, but he's going to be a better offensive driver than Vlad Nemesnikov. And as we said, it's not a knock on Vlad. That's just not his game, though. That's the thing, right? So I wouldn't be shocked that if he does come in, you also see his just overall game, become a little bit more impressive because he's playing on a better team, because that Columbus team is not good.
Not good. And he's getting a lot of tough minutes on their top line. He's playing a lot. But I do like the pick. The thing you said about faceoffs, just before we head to break here, I want to say one more thing. Faceoffs, we all agree, or we all have talked about it on this podcast. We think they're a little overrated in the grand scheme of the game. But when the deployment of your best players relies on it, then it matters. When Nikolai Ehlers gets 14 and a half minutes a night because Vlad Nemesnikov can't win a faceoff, that's a problem. And it's one of the biggest reasons why I think 2C is the biggest need for the Jets going into the playoffs, because you can't have Nikolai Ehlers playing 14 minutes a night just because their line can't win a faceoff. So that Boone Jenner definitely fits that. A guy that Rick Bowness would trust. So let's head to break. Elliott's got Boone Jenner. He's got Jacob Chikrin. Brian's got Casey Middlestat, and who else?
Adam Henrique.
Adam Henrique. And I've got Buchnevich, and I've got Brock Nelson. We've all got two players, so let's head to break. You're going to hear a word from DraftKings, and we will be right back.
Looking for a super offer for Super Bowl 58? DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered. New customers can bet on the big game and turn $5 into $200 instantly in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. New customers can bet $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 58 with code THPN. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas. 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction, void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.com/football for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms and responsible gaming resources.
And welcome back into episode 64 of the Level Fly podcast. We are in the middle of a trade deadline draft, if you will, quote unquote draft. Thank you once again to DraftKings for sponsoring this episode. While we were on break, Chris Streveler signed with the Bombers, so that was pretty cool.
Vibes are good.
Some live breaking news. Yeah, welcome back, Strevy. But Elliott, you are on the clock. There are bigger things, more important things than Chris Streveler right now. We are in the middle of a draft. But no, go ahead. This is going to be the last round. We're all going to get one more pick. So Elliott, your final pick.
I'm going to go with a name that lots of people don't want, but I think he does a job here for the Jets. And I know I might get some grimaces. I might get some, I don't know. I'm going to take Sean Monahan.
Sean Monahan.
Really?
I know that is
He drafted. Okay.
See, so the reason why I do that is because, well, first off, he's making less than $2 million per year. for this
Mhm.
last year. Like that is easily non-movable. Like that's so easily movable. The Jets probably have that space already. They probably don't even have to really make room for it. And I just think that he has a little bit left in the tank. I know it's not the rental piece. It's not the like 2-3 years left player that I just went with Boone Jenner. But this is also, I'm making him my third pick because I think that he would be a selection for the Jets. He would the Jets would trade for him if the rest of the trade market dried up. I really do think that the Jets will go out there and make him a Paul Stastny-esque, like a second time around Paul Stastny-esque deal, where you throw in a second or a third and you go, okay, this is the best we can do. And it's still maybe good enough to maybe not get you over the hump, as someone else has already said today, maybe not get you over the hump, but it might be just enough to get you at least closer. And yes, I know he's playing with Montreal, so his defensive numbers don't look good, but I think that he still has a little bit to give from when he was with the Flames that might be just enough for the Jets to at least get something out of him.
Yeah, and like the one issue I have with Monahan, like I think he's a good player. I think he improves the team. The rumor out there, and I don't think it's gonna happen, but the rumor out there is that the Canadians are asking for a 1 for Monahan,
Heard no.
which
Yeah.
is too much. At the right price, I don't mind Sean Monahan. Again, he would play between Perfetti and Ehlers, kind of give that line an offensive boost. He's a veteran, 28, so Rick Bowness likely would trust him. But the price is a no for me.
If it's at a
Simple
1.
as that. If that's really the case, I don't know if that's Kent Hughes going to an insider and saying, hey, say that we want a 1 and maybe someone will pay. But if the Jets get desperate and Monahan's like the last guy left, they might be like, screw it, we're paying a 1 just because we're going all in. But I don't think Chevy would do that. He doesn't usually panic with moves like this. To be fair, they're usually off the board, but the Monahan thing, I haven't given it much thought just simply because the price is a little too high for me. The rumored price, I should say. Brian, I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, it's too high. And to be honest with you, I don't even see Monahan as a guy that is even worth paying. I would even think a second to play a second line role. I don't think he's a second liner. He plays that amount. I really don't like his game. I think that a lot of his strengths come in a system where he's allowed to kind of just go and do his thing, go and be an offensive guy. You know that the Rick Bowness way is not just to let guys go do their thing. You have to play within the system, and I actually do think that it would hurt him offensively, even if it does bring his defensive game up. And if you're hurting a guy who's not the best offensive guy out there, you might as well just keep Vlad Nemestikov in the that second line center role, because I honestly think that on the Jets right now, Monahan would be maybe the third or fourth best center on the team. I really don't like what he would bring to the team.
Okay. So we've
Fair
got
enough.
a heavy disagree with Elliott's last pick.
I listen,
Brian,
I'm
but
happy with it because it leaves a couple names that I wanted. I thought he was going to take someone else. So I know, Connor, you're happy too because you were expecting maybe that your pick might be gone.
my pick is available.
Yes,
sure.
it is. And
So
who are you picking, Connor?
I'm on the clock, and I'm honestly pretty shocked that this guy made it this far because, or I guess me personally, I was shocked because the first pick, Elliott said Chychrun, and I said this guy was actually the better defenseman, in my opinion, if they were to go add a defenseman, and that's Chris Tanev. I mean, is there a more perfect player for Rick Bowness's system than Chris Tanev? You look at the Jay Fresh card, you look at the clips online of him putting his face in the way of a blocked shot. The 100% even strength defense, like he is a pure defensive defenseman who isn't a liability when moving the puck up the ice. And like I said, he has highlight reel blocked shots. Like that's not a thing, yet he does it. Like it makes like it's hilarious. And he even mentioned on After Hours with Scott Oak that Rick Bowness was one of the best coaches he had when Tanev was young, one of the best mentors he had. Why not bring him back, put him in the top 4, get even better defensively? I talked about making a strength with Pavel Buchnevich at 5-on-5. This is making a strength like I don't even know, like even way higher than a strength. I don't know how to describe it, but
And he's played in this building before.
Yes, as a member of the Manitoba Moose. Great call.
I watched him live.
Yes, you knew he was gonna do great things in the league one day. But he's one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL, like pure defensive defenseman. He's one of the best. And the Jets, one of the best defensive teams. It's kind of a match made in heaven. And this guy's absolutely on the trade board. He's absolutely gonna be moved. The Flames aren't going to make the playoffs, and they have a lot of UFAs, Tanev being one of them. He's 33 years old, probably wants to go win a cup in his last couple of years here. Why not come to another Canadian city, play in the top 4 with Josh Morrissey? He's like Dylan DeMello on steroids, Chris Tanev is. So I would love this pick, and I love the value I got here in this draft, getting Tanev with my final pick. I will absolutely take that. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are.
I've been a big fan of his. There was some questions that I had in terms of, is a lot of his defensive game because of the way, Sutter, structured it in Calgary. And we're seeing now with the coaching change, he's still just as good defensively. And as you said, he's no slouch with the puck. So you're looking at a guy who would legitimately bolster the top group there, and not really have the drawback that say either there's an 100% defensive guy, but he's scared of the puck, or all offense, no defense. You're getting a guy who's got perfect, defensive play for a system that, really has, put that as a main focus. And also, he's above breaking even in his offensive game. And he's shown in the past that he can kind of go up and down offensively. So, I don't know, maybe if he's playing in a defensive system that, the system itself takes a little bit of a burden of him having to do a lot. Maybe he finds a little bit more, comfortability with, being a little bit more of an offensive guy. Like you get a little bit of both there with him. And I think that's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Elliott?
I think it's a great pick. I think if he can kind of, even if that EV defense comes down a little bit, I doubt it would with the Jets. But like if that EV offense could get up into the 60s, I think that would be like the most perfect outcome if you're going for a top 4D. Like you make sure that the defensive side of the game is still so strong, and then you're adding in a guy who's going to bring above average offense. I think that is, if Chevy made that move, I think then you kind of have to give him a round of applause and maybe even a standing ovation for that, because you're making what you're already good at better, and then you're adding to it, right? So I think that is pretty big.
I would like to say, I think that if this is a trade that because do we know if Tanev has any trade protection on him?
I can check that real quick.
Okay,
I would check that,
because if he does, and I'll clarify this obviously if he does or does not. If he does have trade protection and he would need to waive to go to Winnipeg, I guarantee you. Elliott,
he does have a 10-team modified no trade list.
Okay. If there's discussions on if he wants to waive, it would not shock me if the Jets got Craig Heisinger into the conversation, because he was he was involved in the day-to-day operations with the Moose when he was part of that team. And that was in the Moose 1.0 days when they were still Vancouver's affiliate. And he only played the 1 year, and then things obviously shifted around. But I think that might come into effect, because if you've got a guy who's played here before, for staff that's still here, maybe that's sort of what you're going to pull out of your back pocket as like an advantage you might have.
And he's played for Rick Bowness before. The quote I brought up from After Hours with Scott Oak, one of the best coaches he had, one of the best mentors he had when he was a young defenseman. So I don't think you'd have to worry about him waiving. Calgary, like how are you gonna? This is a whole nother discussion. But how are you going to use the whole like who wants to play in Winnipeg thing when the guy plays in Calgary? Like
That's a good point.
It's not like he's going from LA to Winnipeg. Like let's relax.
Well, but hey, we
Um,
had a player go from LA to Winnipeg, and he's loving it here. Actually, multiple players.
yes,
and
yes,
all three of them
exactly.
love it. So,
And I wonder how the guy in LA is doing. I wonder. We should check in maybe next
Wow.
episode on how he's doing. But anyways,
it's not like it's everywhere all over the internet. But
I just think if people are like, oh my god, Tanev has a no trade clause, he would never go to Winnipeg. Like, stop. He plays in Calgary. Like, let's relax.
he's already here in Canada. He's already been here, right? Like,
and Calgary is Winnipeg. Like, what? The Banff is 3 hours away. Cool. Like,
Rocky Mountain
that's the
National
same
Park.
city. It's the same city. Like, I that's one of my takes is like people view Calgary as this great city. It's not. But anyways,
Wow. Connor's picking fights with Calgary.
Yeah. Anyways, let's go to Brian's final pick of the draft.
Okay.
And I have a player up here. I think I know who you're gonna go with.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we reveal my final pick, I just want to say who's still on the board here and who may not be picked here. Elias Lindholm, who we know is available, who's been talked about for months. And then a bunch of these guys who we don't actually know if they're available or not. So guys like Ryan O'Reilly, Matthew Joseph, Tomas Hertl, Braden Shen, Claude Giroux, Vlad Tarasenko, Dom Kubalik, and Sean Walker. A lot of these guys are still question marks as to whether or not they are actually available. But I'm going to take a guy who I'm going to stick with the last theme that we just discussed. I'm going to go Sean Walker with my final pick. And yeah, I see. I thought you were going to assume that I was going to look for
Giroux.
For Giroux. But the more I think about it, the less I feel like it happens with how much Ottawa, talks about him and everything.
But I got ratioed so hard by Sens fans for suggesting Giroux could be traded. So never again. Never again.
Don't get me wrong. He's one of my favorite players in the entire league, and I would love Claude Giroux as the second line center. But I don't see it happening. The reason why I love Sean Walker so much is because you could effectively swap him in as a Neil Pionk replacement on that second pairing and just increase what you're getting in terms of defensive impact with still getting a great puck moving guy who can also kill penalties at a really high clip. I am a big fan of his. I don't know. Like, it's just one of those guys that I see him play. I don't see those like massive mistakes that you'll constantly see from a guy who moves the puck. And he's an improvement defensively on Pionk. And I think that getting Pionk down onto like a third pairing, more sheltered role is key for this team to, have that level of defensive depth. Because if you're getting a lot of defense from that third pairing right now in terms of, Schmidt and Sandberg, not a lot of puck moving, not a lot of offense. If you get a puck mover on that third pairing who can at least, provide a little bit more of a transition game, I like that a lot. And then you have Schmidt as your extra, which I prefer greatly over any alternatives. So yeah, that's where I'm going with that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. And for the reasons you said, Sean Walker, also another thing you didn't bring up, but rental, reasonable cap hit, 28 years old, probably would be able to retain him at a cheap price if you wanted. I don't know what the Jets cap situation will look like next year if they want to move off of Schmidt in his last year or whatever. But he's been great with Philly. You see the ascension here on the JFresh card. He's been great this season, especially in a system that Rick Bowness, I remember after the Philly game, or Scott Arniel after the Philly game said that Philly plays the same style of hockey that the Winnipeg Jets play, like just smothering defense, smothering forecheck. And Sean Walker has been great in that system, very similar system. I don't think there'd be any issues with fit there. I love it. I don't think the price will be too high. Elliott, I don't know if you agree.
I think it's a good pick. I think again, I still believe that yes, 2C is important, but I think the Jets do need to go for a defenseman here at the deadline. I think they need to make two trades. Obviously, one is being a 2C, and then the other one being, a top 4D. And I think Sean Walker fits that top 4D billing. So I think it's a good pick because it would bolster what is already a good defensive core and make it so that Schmidt then, who's had a really good second half of the first half of the year, would be our extra. And I think that's great.
But again, the Jets can improve a strength, make a strength a strength, and even further strength with the addition of Sean Walker. Top pairing, second pairing, third pairing, whatever. The defense core would be better with him in it. So, but Pyong, analytics have not taken a turn this year.
Like, I think the best situation for the Jets here is to get a center, if I'm going off of my team, get a center like Henrique, who is trusted to play those second line minutes and who also isn't a bad player by any means, and a guy like Sean Walker, who should be a decent enough cost, who can slot into your top four. And you've addressed two of those things where you need a second line center who can move up if need be, and you have a guy who can move the puck fairly well in that second pairing. And I think that's what you get.
Yeah. I think my team, you would have to pay a few first round picks and a few prospects because Brock Nelson, Pavel Buchnevich, and Chris Tanev are all probably going to go for at least a one. Tanev, or Buchnevich and Nelson absolutely would, if not like multiple ones plus prospects. So I'm definitely more of the big swing variety, my team.
And then, if you're watching on YouTube right now, I'm going to edit this. I'll pull up on the screen all of our teams. You tell us in the comments who you think did best with the sort of bounds of this fantasy draft. All things considered. And then, just let us know what you think is either where we went wrong, where you disagree with us, because we'd be very curious to hear where everyone's sort of thought process is on that, as we bear down about a month now until deadline day. So,
oh yeah, it's going to be a fun time. Everyone loves trade targets. Everyone loves, the speculation, who's available, who could the Jets slot in. And I think without a doubt, they're going to make an addition. You don't get this opportunity very often. They have pretty clear needs. Like everyone on this list is a top four defenseman or a second line center, except for Buchnevich, who was the one guy I took. That was a winger. But anyways, it was great episode 64. Thank you everyone for checking it out. We'll be posting the teams as well on our socials, so keep an eye out for that at Level Flight WPG. Drop a comment there who you think did the best within the bounds of the draft, the criteria. And we will see you next week for episode 65. We'll be previewing, kind of recapping the Jets All-Star break. Rick Bowness, Connor Hellebuck, Kyle Connor, all headed there to Toronto. And then the Jets get their first game back Tuesday. So we'll actually have a game to talk about next week as well. So come back next week for episode 65. From Brian, Elliott, and I, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week. See you.
Peace.